Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name's Jen Goldsack. I'm the CEO here at the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME, and I'm absolutely delighted on behalf of the DIME team and also the Sensor Data Integrations project team to welcome you to our launch event today. We have an absolutely packed agenda for you, but before we dive in, let me go ahead and introduce the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME, to you for folks who may not be familiar with our organization. So DIME is a global nonprofit, and we are dedicated to advancing the safe, effective, ethical, and equitable use of digital technologies to optimize health. We were founded only in 2019, but I'm very proud to say that we've had outsized impact on advancing the field and against our mission because of how we are positioned in the market. We uniquely sit at the intersection of clinical expertise and technical expertise. And we focus first and foremost on being a convener, bringing the brightest minds and the most passionate experts together in order to advance our mission. Then we undertake some of the most challenging research initiatives in the field to develop action-oriented resources to really support every single one of you working every day to realize the full promise of digital innovation to improve lives. And finally, we take really seriously the responsibility of communication and education, making sure that as we develop these new best practices, these resources, that they make it into the hands of the folks who can put them to best use in order to advance the field. So with that, that's a lovely setup for all of you who have joined us today. It's also, I hope, a nice introduction into who we are at DIME and how we do our work. For folks who are joining us for the first time, I do want to spend just a moment doing some housekeeping bits and pieces so that you feel well-oriented and know how to fully participate today. So first and foremost, it's important that I disclose, in addition to the Zoom voice I'm sure you heard when you all joined, that we will be recording today's session. What that does mean is that you will have access to both the recording and the slides later today. We also really encourage participation in this event. So there's a number of different ways you can do that. Throughout the course of the event, colleagues from Team DIME will be dropping links into the chat so that you can access resources as we discuss them. To engage in the chat with one another, you can use the chat function to communicate with fellow experts on the line. And we are holding a Q&A session at the end of the 90 minutes this morning, so you can pose your questions live to the experts from the project team. In order to do that, there's a couple of different ways that you can participate. You can either raise your hand, not like this, but using the ribbon at the bottom of your Zoom will then promote you so you can ask your question live. You're also very welcome to use the chat function. We'll be monitoring that closely, and we can pose questions on your behalf if you aren't somewhere where you can talk. One piece that's important to note, typically at DIME events, not only is Team DIME dropping links that should be valuable to you for your work, but also often we have active members of the audience dropping helpful links as we go. In order to promote an open conversation, we do not save or publish the chat. So if there are links that get dropped in, please make sure you're grabbing them as we go. Okay, so 4 minutes in, we've managed to introduce you to DIME. We've managed to get you situated and oriented for a great event coming up. Let's actually talk about the content, the subject matter that we're here to touch upon today. And I would be remiss if I didn't begin by thanking this extraordinary project team. Experts from AWS, from Elevance, from Evidation, our FDA colleagues, colleagues from Human First, Icd Standards Association, from Medable, Moffitt Cancer Center, OpenM Health, Oracle, Savvy Patient Co-op, Takeda, and our colleagues over at the Veteran Health Administration came together to say, despite all of the work that has been done to advance the field of sensor data integrations and recognizing the enormous promise of these data to improve the way we care for people, we have a concern that we aren't yet building systems and infrastructure to realize the promise of sensor data in healthcare at scale. And that was the problem that this project team set out to tackle. It was extraordinary vision from this group of leaders in the field, not to be solving a problem that is the pain point today, but to identify the risks of inefficiencies, the risks of inequity down the road, and to say in the pre-competitive space, we are going to come together, we are going to collectively establish and then promote global best practice to make sure that innovation around the use of sensor technologies and sensor-generated measures in healthcare and research has the greatest impact for patients. Collectively, as our North Star, we've talked about ensuring that high quality sensor data is accessible with appropriate permissions, reliable and trustworthy in order to drive better decisions faster on behalf of all of the patients that we're here to serve. So let me take you through how we're going to use your time today. First of all, we have a fantastic expert speaker to give opening remarks as part of a conversation with me. So I'm sorry, you're not rid of me quite yet. To get us moving, Micky Tripathi from the Office of the National Coordinator is here to join us and open the conversation. After that, you'll be meeting members of the project team, and they will take you through what was the rationale behind pursuing this work. Who are the change agents that we need to focus on? And what do each of us on the line need to do to make sure that we are establishing and building our field together intentionally to make sure that we can realize the promise of digital at scale? So, as I said, to kick us off, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Micky Tripathi, National Coordinator for Health Information Technology at HHS. And Micky, I'll tell you something silly. I was chatting to my sister yesterday and I was like, oh, and you know, the National Coordinator is joining us for opening remarks. And she says, National Coordinator for who? And I said, America. She's like, that's quite impressive. So delighted to have you with us today. You and I talk reasonably often about the state of the field. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so we can have a proper conversation here, Micky. But where I wanted to start was, you know, actually, let me do this. Where I want to start is, rather than me boring everyone with your introduction, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone on the line? Tell us a little bit about your background and also the work you do every single day.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jen. I'm really delighted to be here at this meeting and this important kickoff. Yeah, you can, I guess once you describe to your sister that as well, National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, it's like, oh, well, okay, well. When I got appointed, I'm a political appointee, and when I got appointed, my son tweeted, "Congratulations to my father on being appointed to the most boring job in the federal government." Little did he know, it's a very exciting job, though, actually. I think that's what I'm going to talk about. Yeah, I'm the National Coordinator for Health IT. And so we are a federal agency in the Department of Health and Human Services. And our responsibility is to work with our federal partners. So there's an aspect which is within the federal government, which is to work with other federal government agencies on health information technology strategy, alignment of standards, alignment of our approach so that we're, you know, sort of getting the best possible focus across all of the agencies as it relates to health information technology and the goals of the federal government in improving the quality, safety, efficiency, and affordability of healthcare. And then also working with the market, so helping with coordination activities, helping organizations sort of adopt open industry standards and other kinds of things that we'll talk about in a little bit greater detail in a second to help improve the overall climate for innovation and for healthcare at large.
Fantastic. And I'm going to side with you as you have this banter with your son. I do think it's not only an interesting job, but critically important, especially at this juncture in healthcare. And you talk about alignment, you talk about strategy, Micky, as being absolutely core to the work that you do. As I mentioned, what's really impressive about the work that this team has done is that they are trying to get ahead of the 8 ball. We're relatively young as we think about the use of sensor data for driving healthcare decision-making. How important is it to build intentionally for scale? How do you sort of tackle that in your work? Where have you seen success?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm really, just sort of delighted and so grateful that you're focusing on scale in this important industry. So I guess as I think about just, I'm old, so I've had a couple of careers, but in a previous life, I was in academia studying political science and economics, and then I worked at consulting firm, the Boston Consulting Group, for a number of years. So I had the opportunity to work pretty deep in other markets and other verticals, and to spend time, sort of studying them as well. And one thing that has sort of is a daily reminder as I've sort of firmly entrenched myself in healthcare is the extreme, and one of the big differences, and there are lots of differences between healthcare and other verticals, as we know, but one of the big differences I think that characterizes healthcare in a way that makes it really different is the extreme fragmentation on the supply side and the demand side. If you look at almost every other vertical in the US at least, you've got some kind of concentration on the supply side or the demand side that can help to solve sort of the collective action problem, as political scientists and economists call it, that allow for industry coordination to help it move forward. That's really hard when you have sort of that kind of fragmentation, almost cottage industry type fragmentation in some ways in healthcare on the supply side and the demand side. So I think thinking really hard about what are those opportunities for being able to get scale, and how do we sort of leverage both the public and the private sector to be able to do that, I think is just critically important. And and it's really hard for the market on its own, I think, to be able to achieve that because of those dynamics.
Micky, I love that. And I've got that now in my chicken scratch, which I'll take away with me, the idea of the collective action problem. And I think we focus on that a great deal at Dime, and we've tried to do so in these resources. I will circle back to those, but the other piece that I wanted to flag with you is you talk about your roles, and also as we all try and learn from your experience and success. One of the things that we bumped our head up against with this work, with sensor data integrations and in Dime projects more broadly, and we see it across the industry, is this idea that we want to establish best practices, we want to start to align people, we want to start to lock things in, essentially, right? Because certainty is always a gift. Yet this field is incredibly dynamic. It's moving very quickly, and we don't want to stifle innovation or for hard work to become obsolete and irrelevant incredibly quickly. You have a really nice multi-pronged approach to continuing to deliver certainty where you can, from the regulatory perspective in the dynamic environment of healthcare data more broadly, much more broadly than sensor data. Can you share with us some of the approaches that you found to be incredibly successful? Because I actually think it would be really valuable for folks on the line to hear it from you.
Sure, yeah. And some of them we hope will be successful, but but early indications are that we're doing it right. We're getting good feedback. And I guess one thing I would just building on my last comment is I think the federal government in particular plays a really unique role in healthcare because of that collective action problem, and because the federal government is such a large player in and of itself. When you think about Medicare and Medicaid, and you think about the VA and DoD and FDA and NIH, right? All of them, just in their mission sort of functions, play an enormous role as market participants. And so that's one thing that I think is just critically important for us to understand, and the important role that all of the agencies acting together, as well as that we as the federal government through regulatory approaches and other things can help to drive help to drive people to solve that collective action problem in a way that is in the public interest, and in the way that spurs innovation and doesn't allow vendor lock-in or the creation of walled gardens that locks everyone else out. And so our focus at ONC has been to do everything we can to sort of cultivate an open architecture health IT ecosystem. And what I mean by that is a couple of things. One is that we ought to be pursuing approaches where interoperability is based on open industry standards. And that's not, open source. Open source could be one part of it, but we are firm believers in intellectual property. And so it's not saying that everyone has to be open source, but it's saying that to the extent that there is interoperability across systems for data exchange, that it ought to be based on open industry standards. And so we use all the levers that we have at ONC to help to further those open industry standards based on industry priority, public priority, and the collaborative processes that standards development organizations and other collaborations bring to the table to be able to sort of get alignment and sort of as much public input and as much industry sort of acceptance of the standards moving forward. The second part of an open architecture ecosystem, I think, is moving us beyond what I think of as sort of interoperability in the classic sense, where we've thought about data interoperability, and more toward interactivity, which is to say, it's not about just I send you data, you send me data, but we want to be able to start to encourage sort of a set of standards and approaches that say that we have more workflow integration. Because I think if you look at healthcare compared to other sectors, we have shockingly little of that when you think about across entities, and you think about the way Kayak works, and lots of other platform-based businesses that have formed in other parts of the industry. We don't have enough of that, and so what we're doing is pushing really hard through all the levers we have to sort of cultivate that kind of system. And we believe that that is going to be the spur to innovation. because that allows, sort of the requirements for scale or the ingredients for scalability that then allow, sort of new players to come in and, develop that platform type of basis. The last thing I'll just add, just to give specific examples of that, and what do I mean by that? We, ONC, on a roughly annual basis, we approve a set of standards that we call the US CDI, the US Core Data for Interoperability, which is kind of the minimum data set of the healthcare delivery system. It's a set of standards, for medications, problems, allergies, meds, and we, sort of go through a regulatory process. We go through a market input process, and then we go through a process to instantiate those as HHS endorsed standards for data. And that's kind of a rising floor. So that's kind of a minimum data set, for content. And then at the end of this year, one of the requirements that ONC has for electronic health records, which we certify on a voluntary basis, but that covers, the vast majority of the market. 97% of hospitals and over 80% of physician offices use not just EHRs, but EHRs that are certified by the Office of the National Coordinator, my office. And so two things on that. One is they are required to support this US CDI. So that gives greater consistency across the market. So when you think about scalability for sensor data integration, whatever it is, you can have an expectation that, well, there's still a lot of variation in, sort of what data is supported across systems and across settings, but we know what the minimum is because it's got to be that, that US Core Data for Interoperability. The second requirement that we have by the end of this calendar year is that every one of those certified EHR vendors who has a certified API, which is most of them, are required to build a FHIR API, so a RESTful API according to a particular open industry standard called FHIR, that's stewarded by HL7, the Standards Development Organization, and that's required by the end of this calendar year. So by the end of this calendar year, what we'll have is a requirement across that fragmented ecosystem of a single standard for an API and the support for a minimum data set through those APIs. And so what that starts to do is that open architecture ecosystem. And so if you're sitting on the other side of it with a sensor or any other kind of app, you now have greater assuredness of the scalability of whatever it is you're building across provider settings and across EHR vendors.
Micky, first of all, congratulations. It's important and fantastic work that you're doing. And I think these are really important examples. I want to draw on the language that you used that I really liked, the idea of the rising floor. And I think the minimum data standards are such a great example of that. And that's something that this project team and across the board at Dime, we try and think about often. This idea that let's not let, I am not attributing this to you, I'm telling you what we do. So I want to be clear there, but the sort of, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Will what we put out today, will what we put out today be global best practice in 10 years? Probably not. But as long as we think we're driving in the next, in the right direction, we have a plan for a dynamic approach for ongoing up-leveling. That's the way to do this. And the certainty that we can give at any time when the science justifies it is the way to do it. And so, as I said, that rising floor I really like. The other piece I really like there is the tension that you described between interoperability and interactivity. And that strikes at the heart of what we've been trying to work on here, Nikki, really thinking about sensor data today is accessible, reliable, and trustworthy in some cases, just not at scale. So the interoperability is emerging, but in single point solutions. And what made us nervous and what the impetus for this work was, as we grow, what happens when we really do try and move healthcare upstream, when we're relying on these flows of data for better decision-making by a variety of different stakeholders. It won't work if we're relying on these sort of point solutions, interoperability or otherwise. So the interactivity language really, I think, is important and powerful, Micky. And the piece I wondered if you would give us some comments on was we passed out three main stakeholder groups in this work: data producers, processors, and consumers, and thought differently about their needs. You highlighted the enormous, I'd like to call them consumers of health data, FDA, CMS, the VA are sort of consumers of that so they can better care for veterans. How are you thinking about harmonizing across those consumer groups now, Micky? What have you got in the works?
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned before, one of the things that we do is the coordination, sort of the federal agencies, and we have a number of vehicles that we use, to do that on an ongoing basis. But in taking this job, I don't think I appreciated how much, sort of what a big challenge and what a big opportunity that is, and that's just become, sort of increasingly so at an exponential rate as more and more federal agencies get more sort of engaged in some way with our, sort of our health IT ecosystem. And in a way, this is the problem we wanted to have, right? And investing, the federal government invested $40 billion in the adoption of electronic health records over something like 10 years, to the point that we now have, as I described before, 97% of hospitals, over 80% of physician offices. And so now you have federal agencies saying, hey, there's stuff we can do with that. That's why we made this investment, collectively. And so one of the things that we're doing, and we're hoping that, we'll be able to get this finalized, I think, hopefully in this week, is we've got a policy that we're working on as a part of our Department of Health and Human Services function to work with our HHS partners on the coordination of health IT activities across the department. So there's sort of a departmental initiative coming from the Secretary's office that has us working directly with federal agency partners in areas where they're working on health IT to get better alignment of the use of basic standards, like the US Core Data for Interoperability, for example, like FHIR, for example, so that we as the federal government can not only through our regulatory processes, but really through our market presence and purchasing power, be able to sort of say, hey, we're going to demonstrate that good citizenship by saying that everyone should be doing everything they can to use open industry standards and open industry approaches where they're available. If they're not available, well, then fair enough. There are roadmaps for us to think about how to make things and sort of corral those things into open industry approaches. But certainly, at least as a starting place, we ought to do that. So we're working a lot, just as a couple of examples, we're doing a ton of work with the CDC to sort of build the data modernization initiative, the DMI that they're working on, which is sort of a re-architecting of our public health infrastructure across the country to say, how do we base it on the US CDI, on FHIR APIs, on TEFCA, a nationwide network that we haven't really talked that much about, but a number of things that just sort of say that aligns it with the industry once you do that. We're also doing work with CMS on quality measures to try to accomplish the same thing, and starting work with the FDA, NIH, and the VA and others to be able to pursue that as well. So we're really excited about that, and I think that'll hopefully be something that's noticeable in the market over time, where you start to see greater alignment across the federal agencies around the common set of standards that the federal government has already approved.
Micky, that's absolutely fantastic. It's very exciting to hear about that policy that's about to get signed there, and really exciting to imagine the power that kind of harmonization will have across the entire healthcare continuum, as you said, from CDC, the sort of public health side, all the way through to FDA, who are looking at cutting edge research and all of the healthcare that we deliver in between. That's incredibly exciting, and we'll be monitoring that closely. Micky, we've got a packed agenda today. I promised I would make good use of your time this morning. I appreciate you being here. I wonder, before we let you go, we did give you a little bit of time with the resources that this project team put together before we convened this morning. In your remarks, you mentioned the importance of things like open standards, open architectures, within the DIME sensor data integrations toolkit. What are the pieces that stand out to you as most likely to have impact? Was there anything that caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two things that I thought it was all incredibly helpful and helps, especially in a very fragmented, complex market, for organizations to be able to just sort of be able to take off the shelf things to more consistently sort of design and sort of think very strategically about, how they're going to move forward. The things that I thought were somewhat unique and really important were, one, I thought the data flow design, sort of model was really important as we, sort of think more and more about, we have cloud architectures everywhere, right? It's in the cloud. Don't worry about it, or really worry about it. What does that mean? I think, being able for all of us to be able to sort of sit down and say, I need to follow the bits and bytes here to make sure I understand what's going on, to be able to represent more and more to the stakeholders, whether it's a provider organization or the individual patient or whoever, what is happening to the information and how is it being protected and stewarded? I mean, increasingly, security is an issue, but privacy is a huge issue, and the ethics all around, sort of the use of data, especially in the US, where we don't have very strong protections outside of the walls of HIPAA. Once information, extends beyond HIPAA regulated entities, we don't have those kinds of protections. So I think that it's really important for organizations to be very, sort of deliberate in how they think about those data flows and understanding it themselves. I think too often there's a throw it over the transom, it's in the cloud, it's fine, I'm sure it'll be fine. And I think that that's, sort of a really important element. The other piece that I thought was really great was the standards library. Of course, we're standards people. So, the pointing to open industry standards and that nice breakout by the different parts of, sort of the value chain where it applies, whether it's transport, content, format. I thought those were incredibly helpful as well. ONC has a similar kind of thing that we do called the ISA, the Standards Advisory. And I always forget what the I stands for. International, it might be. But that's where we also point to standards across a whole bunch of different sort of domains and use cases to be able to just point to people to, here are areas where a standard actually exists in the federal government. Here are areas where a standard doesn't exist, but there's some growing maturity around an open industry standard, for example, in a particular area that we would just direct people to. So very much love the concept of both of those and the entire framework and the entire set of materials.
Thanks, Mickey. That means a lot coming from you. And I'll give you a little bit of insight into this project team. It's been a really fun group to work with. We've worked incredibly hard, but, to get really professional here for a second, we've been sort of quoting the Zoolander moment, all the files are in the computer and now it's, everything's in the cloud. Why is this still a problem, right? So it's, as we've said, it's not enough, and it's fun to hear you say that. And then what we will commit to doing is following and making sure we stay up to date with that ISA library as well. Our goal, back to the rising floor is, to make sure that that standards library stays up to date, and that for folks who are specifically working with sensors, they can see that subset of information. But we'll make sure that those two things are more than the sum of the parts. And as I said, we're committed to the governance of that and keeping it fresh over time.
Right. Thank you. I mean, I would certainly encourage not to box people in, but, certainly to the extent that you're thinking about connecting in with the healthcare delivery system, which I think everyone is at some level, basing it on those standards that we require of EHRs. And you can find those standards on our website. If you look under EHR certification, we list all the standards that are required there. That will make your life a lot easier because that's when ONC can help you, right? If you're trying to pursue a standards approach with a particular vendor who we regulate, then if you're finding difficulties, then we can actually, help and support you under information blocking regulations and other kinds of things. If you pursue a different path, then our ability to help you is really limited. So that would be another benefit to, sort of collaborating as much as possible with us if you can.
We absolutely will, Mickey. And we'll touch on this a little bit later during the course of our conversation. For now, I just want to thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for your leadership, for the example that you set for all of us in terms of being dynamic and, not throwing our hands up, but actually saying we're just going to keep pace. We're going to shore that up. We're going to create certainty where it's scientifically appropriate. You certainly taught us a lot. We referenced ONC heavily through the course of our project. So thank you for joining us this morning. Delighted to have your eyes on the toolkit and looking forward to partnering to make sure that we continue in lockstep together, Mickey.
Great. Thank you, Jen. And thanks for the invitation. Thanks for, for all of you participating today. And Jen, thanks for your leadership and your enthusiasm around all of this. We really appreciate it.
We're never short of that over here, especially on a Monday morning, Mickey, for better or worse. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
So, folks, it's humbling to hear from Mickey and to think about all of the work that his team at ONC does to think about building for health data in the digital era, all of those digitized data sets broadly. We've really focused here in this project on sensor data, and sensor data has been really at the core of so much of the work that we've done at Dime since launch, and that's very intentional. We believe strongly that the promise of these sensor-generated measures to redefine health and disease in order, as we've already spoken about today, to move healthcare and research out of the clinic and build it around the patient, and even to move it upstream to help us think about, can we truly build a healthcare system that cares for people, as opposed to sitting and waiting in the clinic, waiting for an individual to turn up at the point at which they are already sick. The promise to do that, the promise to better care for people, develop effective new therapies, make better decisions for patients faster, is at the heart of our motivation for pursuing all of the work that we do at Dime. on sensor-generated data. And before we dive in, I want to tell you how this, as the sensor data integrations work, ties together all of the different pieces vis-a-vis sensor data that we've worked on at Dime. So we started with V3, a broadly adopted framework to establish whether a sensor-generated measure is indeed fit for purpose. We built on that. We said we have to make sure that we are generating signal, not noise, meaningful data for healthcare decision-making. So we built our measures that matter framework. We compiled the evidence checklist so that you could—
Jennifer, to interrupt you, you're sharing your desktop and not a presentation or a website.
Thank you very much for stopping me. Let me stop share for just a second and see if we can do this. How's that looking? Are you getting my—
That's the right one.
My slides? Perfect. So we had V3, we had measures that matter. We have the evidence checklist that helps you stay on top of whether you are sort of meeting those requirements. We put it all together in the playbook for digital clinical measures and added on really important considerations about the technology itself and operational success. We've thought about all of the different stakeholders, including payers, who will be relying on this data for decision-making. And we've even launched a portfolio of work to develop and prove out the most critical digital measures in the pre-competitive space through our work on nocturnal scratch and our work on Alzheimer's and related dementia, with a variety of different pre-competitive initiatives coming down the pipe. But what it all comes back to is, are we ready for scale? As we've been talking about with Micky, all of this work reminds us that the science justifying the use of these sensor-generated measures for better decision-making is emerging, and it is robust. And I'm proud of the role that Dime has played in advancing best practices here. But it was really this team, and kudos to every single one of you on the line today, who had the vision to come to the table in the pre-competitive space and say, we believe in the power of this data to help us improve lives. We want to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity to do that because we don't build with scale. That's what this team has been working on, and that's what these new resources are. As we mentioned in our conversation with Micky, we consider three main stakeholder groups as being the change agents. We've developed resources specifically for data producers, data processors, and data consumers. And the resources themselves are incredibly action-oriented. We have a sensor data architecture toolkit, and we heard Micky making some remarks there. That includes the sensor data flow design tool that we'll dive into in just a moment. We have our sensor data standards toolkit. That was the main takeaway from my side from the conversation with Micky. We really have to be thinking about the interactivity of our field across different stakeholder groups as that data flows. We've thought about supporting you guys and being able to implement these resources. Organizational readiness. Do you have the capabilities in-house and with your partners to make this work? Those resources are available to you. So too is a really robust and rigorous implementation toolkit. So there's an enormous amount of resources available to you. And rather than review them, they are all on the website. Everything is open access. I really want to welcome experts from the project team to talk us through the problem that we were trying to solve, why it's so important, and how you can use these resources to improve the way that you are either building digital measurement products, how you are processing their data, or how you may be using them to make better decisions faster on behalf of patients. Ariel, I want to welcome you to the stage, if we can say that here first. You and I have had the privilege of working on so many of those projects that we've just outlined together, V3, the playbook, and now here with sensor data integrations. Micky stole our punchline a little bit, and I love that he thinks about it too. You know, it's all in the cloud. Yeah. Can you ground us? Can you ground the conversation? First of all, introduce yourself so everyone else can get to know you a little bit. And then, why is this so important? What was the problem that we were trying to solve for with this project, Ariel?
Sure. Hi, all. My name is Ariel Dowling, and I'm the head of the Sensing and Measurement Group within Takeda in the Data Sciences Institute. And one of the things that I think when we talk about the data being in the cloud is that there is no one single cloud. There are actually tons of divisions of the cloud. And that's where the concern comes in, is that the data flows from the individual device up into a proprietary cloud that's usually owned by the device manufacturer. And it's segmented off and segregated off for HIPAA concerns, for privacy concerns, for penetration testing into a very select area within their own cloud system. So in order to integrate into that area with them, you need to come up with an individualized solution. So if you're trying to integrate a data aggregator or a platform solution with an individual device, you need to create a one-to-one mapping between where you're trying to get the data and where the individual cloud is. And that's to make sure, that's so that you can go to this individual cloud where it's, again, the data is held off and held in a secure place so that there's no concerns about HIPAA privacy or anything like that. The problem, though, is that means every time you want to do a unique integration, you have to do a one-to-one integration. Usually this is done through an API integration. It could be done through a direct S3 integration, but either way, every time that data platform wants to make a new integration, it has to create a new individual link to each part of the cloud, to each devices that they want to link to. This is an incredibly time-consuming process. It requires specialized knowledge. You need to have the software developers on hand in order to create that link, and it creates some time. They have to do it individually to match up to match both the ends of the pipe. You can think of those as pipes. Each end of the pipe has to match precisely, and somebody needs to sit there and make that in code. So if you're doing that multiple times over and over and over again, it becomes an incredibly large system of pipes that needs to be done bespoke each time you do it. This is a very inefficient way of doing it. It's going to limit the number of integrations you can do because of how manpower intensive it is to make these individual connections. As such, what we really need is a more universal approach. We need a way to create common endpoints for the pipes so that each time a data aggregator or a data platform wants to make a new connection, it can connect to a backend that has a standard interface so that it's easy for them to make that one-to-one connection. It has standard outputs, it has a standard API calls, everything is standard so that they can replicate that over and over and over again. That way you maintain the privacy, you maintain the HIPAA compliance, but you make it much easier for the people that are creating those links to create them over and over and over again and generate them very quickly with very little work. And that's really where the solution lies.
Fantastic. And Ariel, you described that so clearly. And the piece I like and the language I scribbled down was, as long as we do this, we are going to limit the number of integrations that we can feasibly use. And that's the problem that we've been trying to solve for. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you on this one. We have this whole suite of resources that we've built out to get at this. And I appreciate you giving such good voice to the problem that we were trying to solve for everyone on the line. And I want to move to one of our colleagues, Rodrigo from Moffitt Cancer Center, before we move on. Rodrigo, you're a computer scientist supporting researchers at Moffitt Cancer Center. What challenges do you experience on a day-to-day basis? Ariel gave us the really nice 80,000-foot view, really helped us understand the problem we're trying to solve for. How does it manifest for the researchers that you partner with as they try and use these tools to better care for cancer patients?
Hey, good morning, everybody. So yeah, as a supporter of Moffitt investigators in cancer research, we developed several projects to do that. But to me, in general, the adoption of new technologies always bring challenges. In the case of patient-generated health data using sensor devices, we already mentioned this. One of the biggest challenges is compliances. So we need to be in compliance with HIPAA, GDPR, because we are dealing with PHI, personal health information, and we need to make sure that we are following those, HIPAA and GDPR. We also need to protect the privacy of the patient. This is not only about health data. We can know where the patient is at any given time, right? Using the GPS. We can connect that patient with another patient. We can connect that patient with their families. I mean, there is a lot of privacy issues here. And then we go to another challenge. So we have to make sure that we have a security layer in place. So we need to prevent data breaches in data leaks. We need to prevent unintended access to the data. And then we go to something that we talked before, early in the meeting with Mickey. So we need to have standards. We need to have certified APIs from vendors, as they were described before. I mean, I completely agree with that, because this is the security layer that is not only about the storage in the cloud, as Ariel just mentioned it, but about the data transfer. So we need to be able to have a secure system to transfer the data. And we were talking about here about a lot of these standards, yada, yada, but at the end, what we really need is to develop trustworthy from all stakeholders. Our organization needs to trust the system. the patients, the families, the physicians, everybody has to trust the system that we have. And patients should be comfortable sharing the data with us. But at the end, there is another challenge, as you mentioned it. What is going to happen, to have it in the clinic? Integration with the clinical systems. Now we need to work hard on doing that. That integration is important. Other than that, we are just having like a silo of data here and there. So that's what I would like to share with you today.
Rodrigo, really important remarks to open us up here. I love how you contrasted the possibility of all of this with the problems, and in particularly underscored privacy. You also underscored all of the different folks who could benefit from these data, right? Not just the patient themselves, but the people caring for them, including their care partners. We have to figure it out, and we have to figure it out for scale. So thank you for everything that you did on this project. It's been a delight working with you, and I hope that you are as proud as the DIME team is of the resources that we've put out here, Rodrigo.
Diane, it has been a pleasure to work with you all.
Oh, likewise. And you've also set us up perfectly for our next question. And I'm delighted to welcome Shruti to talk a little bit about the different stakeholders that we focused on. With a project team of this caliber, we shouldn't be surprised that we were ambitious in terms of our scope, but we didn't limit this to just clinical research or patient care or public health. To us, in the digital era, these data can flow. So we have to contemplate all of these different areas of the healthcare continuum and think globally. Shruti, would you like to introduce yourself and then tell everyone on the line a little bit about how we tackled that as a project team and the personas we focused on?
Thank you so much, Jen. So hey, everyone, my name is Shruti Iyer, and I work as a principal innovation architect supporting Oracle Health Sciences. And a crucial piece, and Jen really described this, and so did Micky earlier on, is how do we really organize and group the stakeholders that we're really catering to? And you'll see this on the website when you access the resources as well. We've made sure to have this ideology flow through to the rest of the resources too, which is data processors, data producers, data consumers. So producers first, processors second, consumers last. So let me dive into what that really means. So for a data producer, this would entail any organization or individual that would be involved in the collection of data, in the generation of data. This could entail wearable companies. This could entail connected sensor manufacturers. This could entail even individuals that are actually have the responsibility of entering data or of collecting the data itself. The second group of individuals that we're really catering to would be folks that could be individuals and organizations as well that actually work in internalizing that data and processing that data. So that would be this could entail data processors, data scientists. This could entail companies that actually provide vendor services like cloud service providers, folks that have data platforms that need integration into analytics companies, and also finally data engineers themselves too. Finally, and I think Rodrigo talked about this really, really well, is who are we doing this for? Ultimately, we want to ensure that we get positive patient outcomes and really get the right decisions, the right clinical decisions, and enable that clinical decision-making team to make the right decisions in this process. So finally, I want to talk about the data consumers piece. So this would be any individuals that are involved in making those decisions that rely on good quality sensor data to actually make those decisions. So that would entail folks that support clinical decision-making, could be physicians, could be clinicians, could be payers, providers, could be also people that are involved in public health and need access to large at-scale share of data to make those decisions as well. So in setting up our toolkit today, we wanted to make sure that we cater to and focus on all of these stakeholder groups. And thank you, Jen, for the opportunity to work on this project. It has been truly phenomenal, and I have learned quite a bit.
Likewise, I have certainly learned a lot, Shruti, more about things like data architectures than I ever thought. But, as we heard, it's absolutely critical. And, you were a strong voice pushing us to make sure we were always contemplating the needs of all of these stakeholders. So thank you for everything that you did. You've also set us up beautifully. It's almost like we planned the order of questions to hear from Sean Forrest at FDA. Sean, Micky gave really good voice to actually the powerful role that government data consumers can play. And as a team, we didn't just think about the clinical decision, the immediate clinical decision, either by a researcher or by a clinician, but we thought about those downstream decision makers. And of course, FDA is one of those. The team at CDRH has a long history of being quite advanced with using these new flows of data. You rely on sort of real world data and evidence. You've been very successful in that. You've probably led the global regulatory environment in doing that. How are you thinking about positioning yourselves to take advantage of these new streams of sensor generated data, Sean?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So first, to introduce myself, I'm Sean Forrest. I'm a digital health specialist in the Digital Health Center of Excellence at the FDA, and I'm focused in part on projects related to medical device interoperability. And yeah, FDA has been working collaboratively across the agency for some time now at exploring the appropriate uses of real world data. We actually published a guidance document back in 2017 on the use of real world evidence to support regulatory decision making for medical devices. And in January of this year, we also published a draft guidance on the use of digital health technologies for remote data acquisition in clinical studies. And that's out for comment right now and describes a lot of thinking on this topic. We're already using this type of data, though. There was a recent report that listed over 90 publicly available examples of regulatory submissions supported by real world evidence. And I'll drop that link into the chat.
Fantastic.
So I can also point to our action plan for artificial intelligence and machine learning based software as a medical device, published last year, that describes we're working with stakeholders who are piloting real world performance monitoring using this type of data. And in fact, the current draft of CDRH's upcoming user fee agreement with industry includes efforts to incorporate patient generated health data to help advance remote clinical trial data collection and support clinical outcome assessments. So there's been a lot going on at FDA related to real world data.
Sean, that's fantastic. And I think underscoring some of the numbers there is really compelling, right? Those 90 publicly available examples that have been compiled. If there were ever a reason to overcome what Ariel described, right, we cannot be comfortable with a infrastructure that limits the number of integrations. There's a compelling reason, there's a compelling appetite for these kinds of data. So across the different stakeholder groups, producers, processors, and consumers, we have to be building for scale. We have to be, contemplating that at every step of our strategy and our implementation. So thank you for giving voice to that, Sean. Thank you for being part of this project team. It's been an absolute delight to work with you, and really appreciate you being here this morning.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Of course. Sean, thanks so much. And Kimberly, really thrilled to have you here on the line today. It's like this, sort of rotating door of some of my favorite people to work on and true experts in the industry. I mean, your background in genomics to start from, then coming into the digital space, you have enormous experience building out this kind of infrastructure. Again, I'm going to keep using the language that we coined as part of the project team to make sure that these data are accessible, reliable, trustworthy for decision making. Across your experience, what is fundamental to success? What are those traits that you see emerging when this is done well and it's done intentionally? What are those characteristics that you see time and time again? So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and then sharing some of your experience with us, Kimberly.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly. I've worked across data science and data infrastructure across the health and biospaces, first in grad school at Stanford, then at the genetic testing company 23andMe, most recently as a presidential innovation fellow in the CTO office at VA. So to extract the full value of this data, we, similar to what other speakers have said, really need to develop interoperable and interconnected networks that allow the piping of the data between silos. Sensor data is now stored in millions of different silos across data producers, processors, and consumers that Shruti walked us through. For example, in areas I've worked in genetic data and elsewhere in wearables data, these are often siloed, but if we can combine these two data sources, we can learn how genetics, vital signs, and lifestyle all work together to impact health outcomes. So by combining the value of the point solutions into this interconnected network, we can overall make a greater impact. Some key features of those, similar to what others have touched on, is One is really standards and standards-based APIs. And so keys here are to continue to promote the development of relevant new standards as we have new data types that are coming out kind of constantly. And then just to make it really easy to adopt the current standards, which I think DIME has made a lot of great effort on. And so this will really allow data to be piped between organizations in a simple and intelligible way. Another, I guess, would be open scalable architectures. So developing architectures that can support this interoperability while crucially considering the security and privacy at every step of the way. And so I know this project has some reference architectures that can help give organizations really a head start and suggestions on how to develop or start thinking about these robust and scalable architectures. So really excited DIME is taking the lead on this and looking forward to feedback.
Fantastic, Kimberly. It's been a pleasure learning about so much of this from you. I think the tangible experience that you've been able to bring, previously from 23andMe, most recently from VA, has been really powerful for this project. So thank you for your hard work. Thank you for being part of it. And yes, as we heard from Mickey and as our commitment from the project team, this is going to be ongoing. We're going to keep this evergreen. We're going to keep, up leveling the floor here. So yes, thank you for being part of this. And appreciate everything that you do with us here at DIME. And Kimberly, you set us up really nicely for a bit of a discussion around data architecture. So folks, I want to recognize our colleague Ian Sutcliffe from AWS, who unfortunately wasn't able to attend the event today. But he and some colleagues at Oracle really did a nice job of championing this idea of building out a logical data architecture. So articulating the blueprint across the entire healthcare continuum at the interface of what's the business impetus to do this, and then what are the technical requirements for the data architectures that we need in order to support that vision. That was done really nicely. I want to make sure that we dive into that. And I do want to recognize our AWS colleagues who weren't able to join this morning as we dive in. And then to sort of complete the journey here, we had Kimberly telling us about the importance of really standardizing as far as possible and creating the incentives to adopt those standards, the architectures themselves, but architectures for what? And this gets back to what Mickey shared as his one of the most valuable resources within this toolkit, which is the data flow design tool. So Pam, we've described these powerful top-down approaches to getting this right through the architecture. But unless we know where the data's from, unless we can see how it flows, we are always going to be limited. Mickey gave a hint that this is critically important, but from the investigator and from the clinician side, can you describe to us why this is so important, Pam?
Yes, and thank you for having me. So I'm Pam Tenarts, and I'm the Chief Science Officer at Medable. And prior to that, I was at Citi, where some of us worked together on some of the pre-work to all this when we were really in the early stages. And as part of the original mobile technology recommendations at Citi, there was this paragraph that talked about how you should understand data flow as you're doing these new modalities, and how it's important to, going back to the comment about privacy, like knowing where the data flows and how it flows is really important to then know how to write that in a consent, or how to explain that to patients, or even how to know that, sensors from one company may flow differently than sensors from another, and you may need multiple sensors because sometimes countries don't allow the one sensor that you wanted to use because it's too expensive there and it's considered an inducement. So now you have multiple sensors capturing the same information, but with very different data flows. So I went a lot back to the Citi graph that kind of showed how you would set this up, and I had to redraw it every time. So having a tool where you can sort of automatically recreate for every trial over and over again what it really means, how the data flows really flow in your particular clinical trial, just helps everybody get on the same page, and you don't have these lost in translation. I swear half of my life is lost in translation, but you and a visual really helps people understand how all that flows. I'm so excited for this, and I hope that everyone else is as well. But yeah, clinically speaking, we need to know how this all works together so we can put it back together on the back end, and having this visual just facilitates conversations between sponsors and tech companies, participants and the physicians that are trying to enroll them in the site. It's just is so helpful. So yeah, very excited that I was part of this project and really look forward to using these tools to the extent that they're there. And I hope everybody does the same.
Fantastic. Pam, it was great to have you on this, and it's great because we see that continuity in the work that the field's been trying to do in the pre-competitive space. And I love that you brought up those original city resources that have been such an important foundation of all of this. Pam, you also really pushed us to be able to have a shared vision of where the data actually is. Like we are talking across one another between the clinical teams, whether that's on the care side or the research side, and data architecture, engineering, tech providers, right? Our three archetypes, our producers, our processors, and our consumers, unless we have a shared understanding. And of course, you can't do informed consent unless you actually can inform the participant or the patient where their data is going. So this is absolutely critical for a number of different reasons. And Pam, you've set us up beautifully to hear from Theans actually about how this tool can not just help the relationship between, as you said, Pam, the clinicians and the patients that they're there to treat, the clinicians and the researchers and tech manufacturers. But Theans, you and Ian worked so hard on the data architecture pieces, and you actually realized that you taught me, in fact, that this can be a powerful interface between clinical users of these tools and data and their colleagues, right? We're all pulling in the same direction on the engineering and architecture sides to build things that are fit for purpose. Can you dive into that a little bit more, Theans, after you introduce yourself? I'm not doing well at teeing people up.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Diane Bauer. I'm a solution director at Oracle, specializing in cloud architecture for a number of years now. I think it's 15, 18 years. So to be part of the DIME project was quite a good opportunity to say, listen, we can make a big difference here and supporting this great initiative. I was just laughing to myself when Pam said lost in translation. And, we've heard so many times, this is too technical, or I'm not sure what is the clinical requirements, or I'm not sure what is the end goal, or we don't understand what we need to do. So to expand on that is, yes, sensor data platform is critical that we understand the process, the goals, and that we understand from data management and architects and the technical delivery team, what is the expectations and what is the end result that we're looking for. And the logical architecture is a tool that we can use that's almost a translation layer between the clinical sites and the technical teams below that needs to deliver or realize these services and ensure that process that's being required is coming through. Now, this can be used effectively as almost a work document that you work in cycles with between your clinical teams and your technical teams, data management, to ensure that the end process is actually what the clinical team needs to be happening. So data needs to act in certain events, data circumstances, and that needs to be represented in almost a diagram form so that it is understandable by everybody that's working on it. So as part of the logical architecture toolkit, we've also provided some examples how this can be implemented, to see, okay, it is not just, a new methodology or process we're being it, but it is in reality, we've done this in the past, and here's examples how you can do it and how it's been done before. So almost lastly for us, it's key that the collaboration between clinical and technical, start from the start. It's not something that technical team, come almost in the back and say, okay, we can present this platform without even talking to the clinical team. And using some of these tools almost breach that gap that exists between the clinical and the technical team. And Jen, like you're saying, we're one team, and this is a tool helping us to become that one team to deliver that. Thanks.
Of course, and Theans, you're very comfortable bringing me up to speed on all of this, and it's certainly, it's really important. The lost in translation, the gap, if you like, between the clinical teams and the tech teams was really apparent in doing this work, and I am really proud of the solutions that we've advanced here to try and bridge that in a way that is very accessible for all users. I want to keep going in our discussion, but I also want to make sure that we are keeping all of our colleagues on the line with us because we are moving quickly. So Ariel and Rodrigo really took us through, look, what's the problem that we're trying to solve for and what's the promise that we're trying to harness. Shriti talked to us about the different stakeholders that we are trying to support as we do this. Sean described really nicely the leadership of FDA as consumers of these sensor data and real world data, even early in this field. Kimberly was able to describe her vision from across the landscape of experience and success from genetics data through more recently to the use of digital data at VA. Pam talked to us about the importance of the clinical users being able to really visualize and understand where these data are flowing in order to be successful as they use them for decisions. And Tian's just gave us great insights into the systems and architectures that need to exist in order to allow collaboration between the tech teams and the clinical teams. So let's transition. Let's talk a little bit about those standards. And Simona, talking of people who have taught me things through the course of this work, you have been phenomenal in terms of really shedding light, not just for me, but the whole project team on the landscape of standards that exists vis-a-vis sensor data integrations. And, you know, the question that we hear all the time, people sort of throw their hands up and say, well, we just need standards and then it will all be fine. And I would watch you sort of, you know, not actually, but sort of bang your head against the desk there because so many standards exist. And that's what I think is fantastic about this landscape of standards. Can you talk us through the evolution of standards and what's already available to us out in the field and how we've codified those in the landscape and in the library, Simona?
Hello, everyone. I'm Simona Carini. I'm a data scientist at OpenM Health, and I participate in various standard development group. So I think the landscape as we've developed really provides an excellent service, and I'm of course delighted that Micky Tripathi focused on that because that is a place where people can go and see what is available, and so that they know that there's no starting from scratch. And some of these standards are in evolution, some are new, some have been around for a while, but there's no real starting from scratch. So the standards tend to be focused in their scope, and so we have complementary standards that are relevant to various aspects. So there's not just one standard that answers, all the questions, and that's why we have a landscape. And so by showing what standards are available and placing them in an organized structures, the way the landscape does, then it allows not only to see what's available, but also to see whether there are gaps and whether there are efforts that need to be focused on certain things. And we've heard also this, we are in a field that is moving fast. And so it is to be expected that there is this co-development of innovation, new tools and standards, and the having a place where this is shown for people is just of fundamental importance. So I am just delighted of the work we've done, which includes, in fact, that's very important when people go there. It includes also a way for people to submit suggestions for standard, because we know that this is not static. It's highly dynamic. So
yes, and Simona, I think that's really important, and certainly the leadership that your team at OpenM Health has shown, including in partnership with IEEE Standards Association, who are also on the project team. I think you really showed us what's possible. And Simona, thank you for being part of this. Thank you for your patience with me as you sort of really helped communicate the landscape of all of this so we could put it out to the field. And Simona, you've teed us up beautifully for a question that I want to throw to you, Michael, if I can, which is, how do we keep this evergreen? How do we keep this dynamic? It's something that we discussed with Micky. It's something that you and Simona brought up as we built out the landscape of standards. How do we keep this evergreen? As Simona said, we have a mechanism by which Diane will drive and take responsibility for the governance of this resource. But you've been doing this for a while. You've been very successful in this very dynamic industry. From the industry side, what are best practices that you have in order to make sure that you are keeping pace with innovation, Michael? And please introduce yourself first, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So my name is Michael Lagali. I work for Oracle since many, many years in standards, Java, Blu-ray. Recently, well, in the last couple of years, I'm a task force lead in the architecture group on the W3C Web of Things standard. And well, to answer your question, let's first simply identify what a successful standard is, because it has three parts. So one part is to have a specification document. And these things are usually huge, they are hard to read, they have cryptic names, and there are so many of them. The second thing is there is a compliance regime. So something that validates implementations against whether they are compliant and conform to the standard. They try to prevent the fragmentation across different vendors and want to ensure interoperability. And the third thing is adoption. And adoption is crucial because when there are so many standards and some of them get adopted and some others not, then you only have a fragmented space of interoperable manufacturers. So coming back to that, specifications. Actual spec development is not very fast. They are usually huge documents. They are taking a long time to develop until everybody who is contributing there is taking significant time and coordination effort. Then there's a couple of aspects on whether a standard is successful in terms of adoption. And that depends on a couple of things. First of all, complexity. Then, of course, cost of implementation, cost of licensing, cost of getting the standard. It's mostly efficient or effective when the standard is open, when it is free of charge. Of course, there's IPR with it, but when a standard is simple to implement, when it does not have a lot of optionalities, it is more likely to streamline implementation and make it easier and also reduce the implementation cost. To make a standard compliant, well, that also requires a lot of things. And I'm not talking so much about standards on the wire or even API standards, but when it comes to compliance or to an effective standard at a global space, there are some other aspects like not having pure data standards and also not only having API standards that have a REST API, but it goes beyond into some very simple things actually. For example, units. Parts of the world are using SI units, part of the world are using imperial units. If you don't attach units to a sensor measurement, you are somehow narrow in a certain geographic region. And if we want to be effective with the standards, we have to look at the whole thing into a worldwide scale. Adoption. And I'm going to be brief on this one, but I believe it's important. If you look into the Icd standard, which is defined by the WHO, World Health Organization, it's a worldwide standard. It has been developed since many, many years. ICD 11 was endorsed in January 22. It's going to take probably 5 years until the standard is adopted in the US. Right now, as we speak, ICD 9, so the predecessor of the current standard, is still adopted in some areas in the world. So if we think about a global market and also global adoption of a standard, we have to somehow harmonize and work together on a global scale to make the whole thing work. And that concludes what I wanted to say.
Michael, that's absolutely perfect. And I think the remarks you offered just now have really been ones that echo the way that you've coached and pushed us as a team through the course of the project. The idea of an open standard and keeping it simple, that echoes lots of remarks from Micky earlier on. Kimberly too mentioned the importance of the adoption of these standards, and we do need to align around them. And I think that that's really what we've tried to do here in the standards toolkit, which is give visibility to those standards that exist in order to try and drive adoption. And our hope is, Michael, of course, that data producers, processors, and consumers who want to do this better, who want to differentiate themselves within the market, will come in and start either adopting these standards if they're producers or processors, or insisting upon them if they're the data consumer. So we have our data architecture toolkit that puts a lot of the architecture and data flow pieces together. We have our sensor data standards toolkit that really gives folks a source of truth that will remain evergreen for all of those standards that you can use as a business differentiator, or you can use to make it easier to make better decisions faster on behalf of the patients that we're trying to serve. So Michael, thank you for pushing us on all of those considerations around standards through the course of the project. And I think it rounds out that part of the toolkit really, really nicely.
And thanks very much, Jen, for having me and for the opportunity to work together in this excellent team of experts. Many thanks. It was a pleasure.
It was my pleasure. And what we need to think about is, we have these architectures, we have these standards, but it's a question of capabilities, right? Are our organizations ready? Do we have the in-house capabilities, or do we have capabilities among our partner organizations to make use of these data? And I am excited to hear from my colleague, Andrew Potter at FDA. Andrew, a lot of people may think about FDA as almost being as being the sort of the ultimate data consumer, if you're in the life sciences, right? If you're in the business of creating new medical products. As you think, and as a statistician yourself, as you think about how you are preparing for making decisions about the safety and the efficacy of new medical products based on these flows of data, Andrew, how are you sort of preparing your teams? How are you thinking about this? How are you positioning yourselves to make sure that these data are reliable and trustworthy for decision making?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, and I'm glad to be here, and it's been great working with everyone. And great question. Yeah, so I guess I just got back from vacation today, so sorry if I'm a little bit not organized, but yeah. So one of the things we've been looking at FDA on how do we actually start to think about when these data start coming in for safety and efficacy of drugs is how do we actually intake data from when it gets submitted from the pharmaceutical company, so how are we going to be able to handle the larger scale of data? What do we need from the data? So what are kind of our important features of the data? And then what are sort of how do we interact with the data standards that are being produced in the community? And it's great to start to see open data standards, at least from my personal perspective. So it becomes a lot easier for us to say, oh, okay, hey, here's where we can find the standards. We can then cite the open standard very easily when we're talking to a pharmaceutical company or other company, and then it makes it easier. So we know we're coming in with data's coming in this format. So then it becomes, we can start to look at can we develop, standardized tools to start to look at the data, statistical tools to look at the data. So maybe standard graphics, standard tables, standard statistical algorithms that, we can now, be more efficient, but also allow for comparison between different pharmaceutical products, or when we're working with scientific collaborators and clinical collaborators, it's, oh, okay, hey, we've taught them, explain to them this is what this figure is, and then each time they'll get the same figure rather than each time having to sit down, work with your colleagues about what's the new figure each time you do it. So that not just in sensor data, but we're looking at it for more than just sensor data, but with the larger volume of data, I think it's invaluable to start to think about how do we make, standard analytic pipelines on the other end once we have all of the data.
Andrew, I think those are such terrific remarks, and it's about the how standards can also help us be better prepared, right? So as we think about building in-house capabilities at whatever part of the spectrum that you sit on, wherever on the healthcare continuum that you and your team may sit on, we can be better prepared. We can bring those capabilities to fruition at scale if we are thinking proactively about standards and best practices that are, just like you say, repeatable. And this was the important part of it, Andrew, is we wanted to think about not only the one-time use of a single data stream from a sensor, but the reuse of data to be able to drive that learning health system. And you teased that out really nicely. So Andrew, thank you for coming in hot from your vacation, and welcome back and happy Monday. So
I was glad I was able to provide some remarks, and Jen, thanks for organizing all of this.
Oh my gosh, of course, Andrew, you've been brilliant on the team and really appreciate you. And Priya, speaking of people coming in hot, you are, I'm delighted to welcome you today. You are standing in for Anne Bailey from VA, who was such an important part of this project. So one, appreciate you pinch hitting. I think it is a level of collegiality and commitment to the team that we see all the time across our colleagues at VA. And, you know, Priya, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to everyone and then to tell us a little bit about how you're preparing at VA and how you're building out in-house capabilities in order to prepare for these high velocity streams of data from sensors in order to better care for veterans.
Yeah, absolutely. It's collegiality because of how amazing Anne Bailey is. So I'm always happy to sit in on her behalf. I'll start with, I'm the Chief Health Informatics Officer of the San Francisco VA. I work with the National Innovation Ecosystem where Anne Bailey sits to help guide them on equitable data partnerships and equitable innovations. And as a whole, you know, my niche in this career of informatics is thinking through technology. The more ubiquitous it is, the more it becomes a central source of scaling all inequities, whether through inclusion that's disproportionate, like the digital divide, or explicit exclusion that's unintentional but impactful. And so when I'm thinking about how we build our organization, you know, I was going to talk a little bit about the technical feasibility, but I think there's a lot of people who have talked about that already. So I'm going to switch gears and maybe just focus on the building up of the value stream. You know, when I think about the value of sensor data, of digital technology, I'm really thinking about the types of innovations that allow the data types or volumes that allow for prevention or proactive reaction with action on the other end of it. Things like podometrics or the shoes and canes that detect falls that allow us to say, hey, this person might have an ulcer. Let's react to it quickly. Hi, this person might have fallen. Let's make sure they're not on the ground for a day and end up in the hospitalization with rhabdomyolysis. When I think about that data, though, just as you're pointing out, everything that we add in terms of data detracts from something else. And I work on the operations end, more so the research end. And so when I think about what that detraction is in operations, it is attention or the perception of safety and sometimes safety itself. When I think of attention, it's, you know, when a patient has a pressure mat indicating that they might have an ulcer that becomes a larger pressure ulcer that leads to amputation. If there's not a clinician on the other side of it, then all you're doing is providing information that you can't act on. And as an organization, we see that as a welcome problem space, but in and of itself of a liability because we're promising patients tools that we can't deliver the actions on. So when I think of the value stream, it really boils down to, for me, working with companies and products and building a digital strategy internally that allows us to prioritize products and product development with the efficacy that warrants that attention. And when I think about efficacy, I personally think about the efficacy in addressing the marginalized need from input to output. When we ask patients to use continuous glucose monitoring devices, for instance, to upload large volumes of data regarding their blood sugar, are we actually explaining, are we actually providing valuable reciprocal feedback to patients that that glucose of 180 versus 140, that's a difference between an A1C average of somewhere around 8 to somewhere around 7. Do they know the mortality deficits attached to that? Do they know the kidney disease and the heart disease that's on the other end of that? How do we actually, in an integrated fashion, communicate that to patients just as much as we communicate that to the clinicians? Talking about integration, the second thing is, how do we make sure that glucose ends up getting into the exact right place in the blood, in the electronic health record? How do we ensure that with structured data as well as unstructured data? What if the patient is telling us, hey, I took my blood pressure at home, it was this? Well, that needs to get to a clinician who acknowledges what that means, who provides an action to it, then who bills for that encounter, and then who puts that encounter in a clinical reminder so that we satisfy our quality metrics. That should be integrated from input all the way to output, both for the patient and that reciprocal feedback and for the clinician. And then last but not least, when we're talking about all of these things, we're talking about prevention, but how do we make prevention tangible? What is it that makes us say, hey, in podometrics, this pressure ulcer can lead to an amputation, and that is a value stream on its own? When healthcare, acknowledging the VA is slightly different in this because we're truly universal healthcare, but healthcare itself is not modeled to allow for that fiscal benefit. And so putting that all together, what I'll say is, when I built up my department, which is one of the key departments to lead on equitable innovation across the VA. We do it from San Francisco because we have a lot of partnerships in Bay Area technology, and we have a lot of expertise and investment in the power of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What I see consistently is companies who are trying to get that value stream, trying to say, okay, this is a use case that actually provides benefits. That's wonderful. We should start there. And then I see companies who take that next step and say, we can integrate this in a fashion that mitigates the amount of work required for clinicians, that mitigates the amount of attention that you need to sustain this data and this data volume. But what I rarely see is people who say, and this also addresses that marginalized need for the patient. This is how we improve that inclusion to make sure patients are the core of the empowerment of the value of the data that they provide. It is ultimately a patient who is the key data consumer, not the clinician. We help leverage the action to guide a patient, but it's really the patient at their core. And then how do we actually make that prevention tangible? When we can find, we have the infrastructure to work with companies and products that are looking to develop in that fashion. But we need to sway away from just value and just integration and actually ask how we can complete a comprehensive feedback loop from patient to prevention.
Priya, I think that's so important to tease out the value stream there. And I think that it's a good reminder that we have that opportunity cost at the operational level if we're not doing this well. So strong call to action to build out those capabilities. And thanks for being here today. Reem, I'd love to bring you up to the stage to do a quick introduction. And then, you were a real champion of the opportunity toolkit and the capabilities model. Tell me about why it's so important in our field today to be benchmarking our capabilities.
That's a very great question. So hi, everybody. My name is Reem Yunus. I'm VP of Digital Clinical Measures at Medable. And as you will see from that, the toolkit, it's very expansive, very comprehensive. And so on the continuum of data flow, or there's different stakeholders have different capabilities or maturity of capabilities. So in order for them to use the tools appropriately and not be overwhelmed with how much of information need to process or go through, we designed the capability maturity model or a scoring model that would allow the different stakeholders input their level, or following a few questions or options in 5 different areas to determine their actual capabilities. So then they would focus on building what's needed for them to, excel in what they provide. So I'm very, very excited about this tool. There's so much 2 cents on it.
Fantastic. Reem, again, thank you for pushing us to do this. It doesn't matter if we have tools and resources if folks aren't ready to implement them. So you did a really nice job of making sure that this was a core component of the toolkit, and it wasn't just something to admire, that you can use the calculator to benchmark where you are. So thank you. And as we move towards rounding out, I'm going to bring a couple of our closing speakers up to stage at once: Jordan, Creepel, Chris, and Aaron. And Jordan, I'm going to come to you first for a quick intro. And of all the people to thank, you pushed us really hard to say, this is great, but if it's crappy data, it doesn't matter how easy it is to get your hands on it. Obviously, from the payer perspective, tell us a little bit about why this is important.
Yeah, it's such a critical issue. And for those who don't know me, I'm Jordan Silverman. I direct clinical analytics and research for digital care delivery at Elevance Health, formerly Anthem. And in limited time we have here, I'd briefly emphasize that, as we begin to use sensor-generated data more and more, we're going to encounter clinically meaningful data quality flaws. And so vigilance to that is going to be really important. And there are all kinds of examples of this. When you're using a sensor in a clinical context, you can make sure that it's being used appropriately. When it's out in the wild, that's not necessarily going to be the case. And so utilizing some of the resources that DIME has put together around data quality may be critical. And I would also certainly encourage utilization of best practices from organizations like the Society for Clinical Data Management and so on. It's been a real privilege to be a part of this critical initiative, Jen. So I will leave it at that.
Fantastic. Jordan, it's been great to have you here. Not only do you bring the payer perspective, but also that clinical perspective. And again, you pushed us to make sure that we had those quick start guides so folks could access all the information in one piece about quality, privacy, security. They're all there in the implementation toolkit. Creepel, I want to come to you during our closing quickfire. Obviously, clinician treating patients with cancer every day at Moffitt. Why is it so important that we are thinking about scale now as you think about the patients that you care for, the patients that you operate on? Why is it so critical that we aren't limiting the number of integrations we can do? We aren't limiting the availability of this sensor data?
Thank you, Jen. My name's just a quick introduction. I'm Creepel. I'm one of the head and neck surgeons at Moffitt Cancer Center here. And it's been a wonderful experience being part of the team. I think Jordan highlighted quite a few salient points, but the reality is, when we take this data from or patient-generated data from a sort of controlled clinical environment to going into a real-world data set, forget about the wearable data, but even the most robust clinical trials don't uphold, and so I can only imagine that bringing this up to scale is going to be an enormous task, not at an organizational level, but also as we move the field forward. And I think that's where having these standards and putting in time as a group and coming up with this toolkit is critically important, because it sets the stage of what we bring on board next. And just a couple of other points, for me, it's this also allows empowering patients, which is for them to really take handle on their own care, make the changes in real time based on the data. Some of my patients anecdotally have been wearing their Fitbits, and they will actually track their own activity levels and change it, right? And so this truly shows that patients are going to own some of these the data, empower themselves, make the changes, and that's how we can improve clinical outcomes. Ultimately, in cancer, it's decreasing treatment breaks, improving survival and quality of life. We have to balance that out, and I think this allows us to move the field forward.
Fantastic, Creepel, great remarks and really compelling examples of why this data is so important for so many different people. Chris, you, excellent data architect. You're here, you've been really thinking about helping bridge that gap that we described earlier, that disconnect between the clinical teams focused every day on caring for patients and actually the data folks who are trying to support those goals. We're thinking about patients too. Tell me about how you hope this work will impact the field and the patients that we're all here to serve.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jen. For everyone on the call, my name's Chris Sukala. I work for Oracle Health. I've got around 25 years industry experience. Why is this really important? I think Creepel and Jordan said it very well. This is all about connecting the ecosystem together in a scalable and easy way that me as a patient, individual patients, clinicians, physicians can all access the information in a timely manner. And what I want the audience to really take away is what this work will do is the 3 Ps. And let me just explain what that is. Prevention. This is all about cutting down those ad hoc encounters in hospital. This is where most of the money goes. So if we can provide a better way of knowing what affects people, what affects patients, their conditions, how they get ill, what makes them ill, we can prevent that. So from physicians, clinicians, research, public health, population health, we can prevent that. So it's really, really important that we have the data to be able to make those decisions, and sensor data allows us to do that. The next P I would say is proactiveness. So as Creepel was saying, really empowering patients and individuals to take the responsibility of their own healthcare and their own well-being is absolutely crucial to us becoming a much more healthy society. And it really makes the patients and individuals proactive. It makes clinicians and physicians and researchers, and again, the whole public health, population health, really, really proactive in getting health better for everyone, making health better for everyone. So really, really key. The last one is where I think medicine is absolutely going, which is all around precision. So it's all about precision sort of medicine. You know, the more we know about ourselves, the more we know how we're affected, you know, with genome sequencing coming in, this data integration and interoperability can really make those treatments personal to us. So by connecting up that ecosystem, by having the systems in place, by having the dashboards, the thresholds that we're monitoring and understanding how people are doing, we can really provide what they need up front. And it's all intertwined. So those 3 Ps are absolutely critical to bettering patient outcomes, and sensor integration and all the work that we've done on this project, which has been brilliant, enables that process to start.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you for those. I think the 3 Ps are critical. And gentlemen, you've all teed Aaron up perfectly. Aaron, the most important person on the line today. Such a joy to have on the project team. We've chatted a lot back and forth one-on-one. Aaron, as a patient and as a technical expert, tell me a little bit about your hope for these resources as we push their dissemination out into the field, and as we think about these producers, processors, and data consumers using these to improve the way that we care for patients.
Yeah, so it's been an honor being a part of this. I'm Aaron Blocker. I live with an ultra-rare genetic metabolic bone disease called hypophosphatemia. And then I also have a background in data analytics and engineering. So for me, just thinking about, you know, even my own care as an ultra-rare disease patient, I have to travel out of state for my care several times a year, and that is not uncommon in the rare disease community. But also having a disease that affects my muscles and bones, there's a lot of, you know, things I have to do, that data that they try to get about my movement and how active I am, and et cetera. So this work lends well into that. I mean, I personally can see how it's going to benefit patients like me, patients who, you know, need to be monitored, need their physical activity monitored. And being able to do that remotely is something that's huge for patients who have to travel. You know, it's very time consuming and everything to have to travel for care. So to be able to, you know, launch this and hopefully put this out there for the community at large, patients, clinicians, everybody to, you know, utilize this and try to get to a point to where we can get all of this data. And being a rare disease patient, there's very few of us who have my disease within this country. So being able to have, you know, this type of data and have a robust amount of data is huge. It will, you know, affect our treatments. It will, you know, make this better for patients. And that's ultimately what this is all about. And then, you know, I hope that this lends to get more people and more clinicians and researchers and patients involved in this and their care, and, you know, taking a hold of this so that we can really utilize all this data and these sensors that we have available to us. That will really hopefully change the game for, you know, this type of research. I mean, it's huge. It's been an honor to be a part of. And I genuinely hope that everybody who is in this field and this research will utilize this and use this kind of as a springboard to something greater, to really get involved, and to realize that, you know, there are patients like me who will benefit from this, who will ultimately be the ones who are able to, you know, take hold of their care and, you know, have better outcomes. It's going to be huge, especially for the rare disease community and the data that we need.
Fantastic. Aaron, really, really powerful voice there, you know, and we've talked a lot about the consumers of data, you know, who are trying to make decisions, but really the reason our industry exists and the reason that we're excited about these data is because we firmly believe that they can improve the way that we care for patients. We can better care for them clinically and also provide a less burdensome way for them to get the care they need and to really focus on their health. You have been an inspiration to me during the course of this project. The sidebar conversations that we've had, in addition to your participation with the project team proper, have really been an honor, and Aaron, and they've helped keep us focused. This is one of our most technical projects that we've completed here at DIME, and it's always important to have that North Star. What we're trying to do here is improve the lives of people, and thank you for everything that you've done, the strong voice that you've given to the project, and certainly the way that you've kept me on track in terms of what we're trying to do here with this extraordinary project team.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So in closing, and I will do this in 30 seconds or less, unless I'm sharing a picture of my dogs again, and that won't be very helpful to anyone. So I do want to conclude by thanking not only Aaron at Savvy Co-op, but also the AWS team, the Elevance Health team, Evidation, our FDA colleagues, Human First, IEEE, Medable, Moffitt Cancer Center, Open Health, Oracle, Takeda, and the Veterans Health Administration. This is why we've been able to put this together, work of the caliber, available open access to you to improve the way that you build intentionally for success at scale to better care for patients. We had extraordinary experts with real vision on this project team. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of us who joined today for this event. Hopefully it was valuable. All of those resources are open access. Please start using them today. And of course, a warm invitation to all of you to join us as a member here at the Digital Medicine Society so that you can help advance this vision with us. Appreciate all of you on the project team. Appreciate all of you on the line. Thanks for hanging in with us and have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much, everyone.